One of the more amazing things about being involved in hand reading in the United Kingdom in the 1980s and the 1990s was I had the opportunity to meet quite a lot of important people in the hand reading world at that time, and people that you may have heard of and people that you may not have heard of. And I unfortunately didn't ever meet Noel Jaquin. He died in 1974, and neither did I meet Beryl Hutchinson, who died in 1981. I didn't start doing hand reading until 83. But I did go to the Society for the Study of Physiological Patterns many times. The SSPP was started by Noel Jaquin in about 1945. And as he kind of withdrew from hand reading in the 50s, it kind of got managed by a woman called Beryl Hutchinson, who wrote a really good book called Your Life in Your Hands in 1967. That was actually her second book. Her first book came out in 1958. And people like her and Mir Bashir ran the SSPP for many, many decades throughout the 60s and the 70s. And in the 80s, it was taken over by a woman called Mary Anderson, who was also a hand reader and a psychic and clairvoyant type person. She wrote quite a few books on hand reading. And Peter West also was quite well known in the UK at that time, because he wrote a lot of articles in what was called Prediction magazine, which was an astrology, hand reading, and numerology magazine, and often had lots of little occult things in it too. And that was kind of the core group of people that formed the SSPP, were active in the SSPP in the 80s. And they turned it into this group that kind of did a comparative study of hand reading, astrology, graphology, and numerology. And so they would alternately throughout the year have different workshops and lectures on those particular subjects. And as I became involved in the Chirological Society at an administrative level in 1989, that's when they kind of approached me and I started going to their conferences. So from about 1990, I went to their annual conference and I started giving public lectures at their monthly meetings, which were held in London at the London School of Economics. And I did that for many, many years. And, you know, within a short time became kind of very well-known and well-liked speaker and a regular feature on their circuit and a regular feature at their conferences. And it was at the SSPP conferences that I met one of the most important hand readers that had a big influence on my hand reading career, and that is a guy called Johan Hjelmborg. And actually, here is a photograph of Johan at the SSPP conference. I couldn't tell you quite what year that was, but early 1990s for sure. Johan is a Danish hand reader. He, as far as I know, is still living in the Canary Islands, but he was born in Denmark and he grew up in Denmark, and he'd been studying hand reading since the late 1960s. So by the time I met him, he had already been doing hand reading for over 20 years. Maybe, 20 years, something like that, maybe 25 years. And he came all the way from Denmark every year to the conference, and he was their kind of one of their key speakers on hand reading, and he was also an incredibly good astrologer. So it's a very rare combination to find someone who's both an astrologer and a hand reader. And I was also conversant in astrology and still learning astrology at that stage, because I was studying with Charlotte Sutherall and the Oxford Astrology Group. So we were able to have this conversation both about hand reading and astrology together. And we always really, really enjoyed having our conversations together. We would be excited to see each other on a Friday evening. And the Friday evening of the conference at the SSPP was always an interesting evening, because they had a guest who they would take a sample of their handprint, their handwriting, their astrological chart, and their number scopes, and they would put them up on the walls while everybody went for dinner. Then after dinner, all the hand readers would give a hand reading of that person's handprint. The astrologist would talk about the chart. The graphologists would talk about the handwriting, and the numerologists would talk about the numbers from the names. And so you had this fascinating evening of correlating all these different subjects. And Johan and I would always come up with the same things. And we go, and what we realized from listening to each other as we talked about the hand, we actually approached the hand in completely different ways. And yet we always came to the same conclusion. And this was like very, very striking for the both of us, that we would We were able to analyze these hands, get it absolutely right. I mean, this was the fascinating thing about doing this correlation. The astrologers said the same things, the graphologists said the same things, and the hand readers all said the same things about this person. About we didn't even know who it was in the room. We couldn't tell. All we heard there was the handprints and the chart. And we were all making these descriptions about this person, and they were all incredibly accurate, and they already all overlapped with one another. And that was really quite extraordinary that that actually happened. But Johan and I are particularly concerned and interested in the chirological aspects of that, of course, because that was our area of speciality. And we were always fascinated that we came up with these same understandings as each other, and yet did it in different ways. And so we would sit down after this and we would like, well, how do you say that? Why do you say that? How did you get to that conclusion? But you look at it in such a different way. And we just had this fascinating afternoons where we would end up laughing how these both arriving at the same conclusions, yet seeing different hand features that pointing in that direction, coming up with different kind of things. And so we learned a lot from each other, I think, from those conversations. And we also, when I started running the advanced research seminars, I would invite Johan to come to those, and he came to those as well. So he met Johnny and Laura Thornton and Lynn Steele and all the other, Chris Swain as well, the other people who were involved in the group at that time, who were doing the seminars and research for it. So he was very much part of that melting pot of ideas in the 1990s that we were pulling all these ideas together. So I'm very grateful to him for coming from all the way over from Denmark to do that and to take part in those workshops, because they were very seminal for all of us. And there's some things that I learned from him that are really, really important and really interesting, and they've had a lasting impact in my approach to hand reading, particularly understanding the significance of the ring finger and the little finger. He sees it in a completely different way than I do, but those ideas sort of percolated through. His notion of applying the chakra to the hand, seeing the energy centers in the hand, and he talks about that in his book and illustrates that in his book as well, and I can perhaps show you some pages from that as well. But he's got a completely different way of looking at the hand in terms of the sort of symbolism of the chakra and how they apply to the hand. And he also came up with this notion of cramp lines, and the cramp lines are something that have had a big effect in terms of our understanding of trauma as it shows up in the hand. And it's very well worth getting into that side of it. So I'm completely indebted to him for the notion of looking at the hand in terms of chakras. And you can see that in Johnny's book too, because Johnny talks about the chakras in his book too, and you can see the ideas that have kind of crept in from Johan into Johnny's presentation, and this notion about the cramp lines too. So Johan, if you ever get to watch this, I want to say thank you very much for the time we spent together. We had an absolute blast at the SSPP conferences. It was a fantastic opportunity to meet you and to discuss those things with you, and I'm always very excited to meet with you, and I hope you're doing well. But Johan, you're one of the people who taught me about hand reading and inspired me in the 1990s, and so I just want to say thank you and give tribute to you. And for anyone who understands German, this is his book. It is in German, unfortunately, and I can't read German. I can understand it German. Zeichen und Planeten in der Hand. It's the only book I think he's written. But if you're able to get that, or if you have an opportunity to meet Johan in either Denmark or Germany or the Canaries, take the opportunity. He's a very wise man from whom I learnt a lot. So thank you, Johan. And also thank you to Harry Gallagher and Mary Anderson and Peter West and all the people who were running the SSPP in the 1990s. Unfortunately, that group folded, I think, in about early 2000s. I'm not sure, because I'd left the UK by that point and was here in New Zealand, but it hasn't perpetuated, but it served a very valuable purpose for many, many years. And I think 60 years of a society like that is a pretty good going. So anyway, SSPP, Beryl Hutchinson, Noel Jaquin, Mary Anderson, Peter West, and Johan Hjelmborg.